February 23rd, 2002. The Nardò Ring in southern Italy. 3 in the morning. Ferdinand Piëch, the man who runs Volkswagen, stands trackside watching an unpainted carbon fiber supercar scream past at 200 miles per hour. For the 12th straight hour. The car wears a VW badge. The same badge on your neighbor's Golf. The same badge on the Beetle your grandmother drove to church. In 24 hours, this car will set 7 world records that still stand today, in 2025. And Volkswagen will never build a single one for sale. How does the company that makes the people's car build something that embarrasses Ferraris, and then refuse to sell it? 322.891 kilometers per hour. Let me say that again. 322.891. That's 200.6 miles per hour. Average, for 24 hours straight. Not peak speed. Not a lucky run. Average. The FIA, the same people who certify Formula One records, had to send officials to Italy because they couldn't believe a Volkswagen had done this. And here's the thing that makes absolutely no sense. 23 years later, those records remarkably still stand in their FIA category. Not Ferrari, not Porsche, not Bugatti, which Volkswagen also owns. The car they refused to build still holds the record. Let me paint you a picture of corporate insanity. It's 1997. Volkswagen, the company whose biggest flex is selling 21 million Beetles, decides to build a mid-engine supercar. Not a hot hatch, not a sporty sedan, a full-blown carbon fiber, 200-mile-per-hour supercar. Somewhere in Wolfsburg, Germany, executives had what I can only describe as a 3-martini decision. Because the company that built the people's car suddenly wanted to embarrass the cars of the 1%. And this brings us to Ferdinand Piëch, possibly the most obsessive engineer to ever run a car company. This is the man who once rejected a prototype because the ashtray didn't close smoothly enough. Normal CEOs buy yachts. Piëch built a 600-horsepower science experiment and made engineers drive it for 24 hours straight to prove it worked. He didn't just want Volkswagen to build a supercar. He wanted to humiliate everyone who said they couldn't. So Piëch picks up the phone and calls Italdesign Giugiaro, the legendary Italian design house that created the original Golf, the DeLorean, the Lotus Esprit, and about 100 other icons. His instructions? Build me a supercar that proves Volkswagen can compete with anyone. The budget? Essentially unlimited. The timeline? As long as it takes. German engineering meets Italian design with 0 accountants in the room. What could possibly go wrong? Now let's talk about the engine, because this is where German engineering gets absolutely unhinged. The W12. Not a V12 like Ferrari builds. A W12. Picture 2 narrow-angle VR6 cylinder banks, the ones Volkswagen already made for the Golf VR6, joined together at a 72-degree angle and sharing a common crankshaft. It's like 2 engines having a very uncomfortable relationship. 12 cylinders, 4 banks, 1 block. Engineers called it packaging efficiency. I call it showing off. The first version debuted at the 1997 Tokyo Motor Show. The W12 Synchro. 420 horsepower, all-wheel drive. And the automotive press collectively lost their minds. A Volkswagen with supercar power? The same company that sells the Jetta? Car and Driver called it proof that VW has serious ambitions. But 420 horsepower was just the beginning. Piëch looked at it and said, in typical Piëch fashion, more. Let that sink in for a moment. 420 horsepower wasn't enough. For a concept car that would never be sold. From the company that makes the Beetle. Ferdinand Piëch didn't do good enough. He did embarrass everyone. 1 year later, 1998 Geneva Motor Show, Volkswagen reveals the W12 Roadster. Convertible, Targa roof. Still making 420 horsepower. But now rear-wheel drive to prove it was a proper sports car. And a 0 to 60 time that contemporary journalists estimated at under 4 seconds. For reference, a Porsche 911 Turbo of that era did 0 to 60 in around 4 seconds. Volkswagen had built a concept car that could potentially embarrass the 911. Let me repeat that. The Golf company was threatening Porsche. But here's where corporate politics enters the chat. See, in 1998, Volkswagen Group acquired Lamborghini, and they already owned a chunk of Bugatti, and they were buying Bentley. Suddenly, Piëch's pet project had a problem. If Volkswagen builds a 200-mile-per-hour supercar for, let's say, $300,000, why would anyone buy a Lamborghini for $500,000? The W12 was too good, and that made accountants very nervous. But Piëch wasn't done. In 2001, he unveiled the final evolution, the W12 Nardò. Named after the famous test track in Italy, the engine grew from 5.6 to 6 liters, an all-aluminum block, keeping weight down while making 591 brake horsepower, 458 pound-feet of torque, all naturally aspirated, no turbos, no superchargers. Just 12 cylinders of German insanity breathing through 48 valves. And underneath? Pure double wishbone racing suspension front and rear. This wasn't built for comfort, it was built for war. The target? Break every 24-hour endurance record that existed. And the design, Giugiaro created something that still looks futuristic today. Scissor doors, the kind you see on Lamborghinis. A continuous glass roof that flows from windshield to rear window, one piece of glass. The engine visible through a rear window. Aggressive wheel arches, and that signature orange paint that made it impossible to ignore. This wasn't a concept car that looked like a bloated refrigerator. This was a weapon designed by artists. February 2002. Nardò Ring, a 12.6-kilometer circular track in southern Italy. Volkswagen doesn't just want to set a record, they want to set all of them. The plan? Drive the W12 Nardò for 24 hours straight at maximum speed. Not racing, not drafting. Just one car, running flat out, for an entire day. Multiple drivers rotating, engineers monitoring everything, and Ferdinand Piëch, personally, watching from the sidelines. The car launches at midnight. By noon, it had already broken records for 1 hour, 6 hours, and 12 hours. Average speed never dropping below 315 kilometers per hour. The engine, designed to rev to 7,000 RPM, held steady at around 6,000 to 6,500 for hours. No overheating, no mechanical failures, no drama. Just German precision doing exactly what German precision does, making everyone else look bad. Still with me? Because this gets even more ridiculous. 12 hours of running at 200 miles per hour, and the hard part was just beginning. Hours 13 through 24, the night shift, when most endurance cars start showing wear, when tires degrade, when engines get tired. The W12 Nardò didn't care. It kept screaming around the banking at 320 kilometers per hour, like it was on a Sunday drive. By hour 20, the FIA officials were running out of record certificates to fill out. By hour 23, they'd broken 7 world records, and were still going. 24 hours, 7,740 kilometers covered. That's 4,809 miles. Average speed, 322.891 kilometers per hour. 200.6 miles per hour. Average, for an entire day. To put that in perspective, if you drove your Honda Civic at its top speed for 24 hours straight, your engine would have exploded by hour 3. The W12 did it while barely breaking a sweat. The FIA certified 7 world records that day. 1 hour, 6 hours, 12 hours, 1,000 kilometers, 1,000 miles, 5,000 kilometers, and the big one, 24 hours. All of them, still standing in 2025, 23 years later. Ferrari hasn't beaten them. McLaren hasn't beaten them. Koenigsegg hasn't beaten them. A car that was never sold holds records that production supercars can't touch. And if you're thinking, how is this even possible? You're asking the right question. Hit that subscribe button because we're about to dive into why Volkswagen built the greatest supercar they never sold, and the corporate conspiracy that buried it. Trust me, it gets even more insane. Let's put this in perspective. In 2001, the fastest production car you could buy was the McLaren F1, which topped out at around 386 kilometers per hour. The Ferrari 550 Maranello did about 320. The Porsche 911 996 Turbo managed 305. Volkswagen, the Beetle company, had built something that could sustain speeds rivaling the era's fastest supercars, for potentially one-third the price. Industry analysts at the time estimated that if the W12 had gone into production, it would have cost somewhere between $250,000 and $350,000. The McLaren F1, over $1 million. The Ferrari Enzo, which came out in 2002, was $650,000. Volkswagen had built a car that could potentially embarrass million-dollar exotics for the price of a well-equipped 911 Turbo. And that was the problem. Here's where the Three Martini decision goes sour. By 2002, Volkswagen Group owned Lamborghini, Bugatti, and Bentley. The W12 Nardò wasn't just a concept anymore. It was becoming a problem. Think about it. If VW sells a supercar that embarrasses Lamborghini at half the price, who buys the Murcielago? If VW proves they can do 200 miles per hour, why does Bugatti need to build the Veyron? With Lamborghini, Bugatti, and Bentley now under the VW Group umbrella, the business case for a Volkswagen-branded supercar essentially evaporated. So the executives did what executives do. They held meetings. They ran projections. They consulted accountants. And somewhere in a boardroom in Wolfsburg, they made the decision. The W12 Nardò would never go into production. Not because it didn't work. It worked perfectly. Not because customers didn't want it. They absolutely did. But the prevailing theory among automotive historians is simple. It would have competed with the very brands VW had just spent billions acquiring. Why sell a $300,000 Volkswagen when you can sell a $500,000 Lamborghini? Corporate logic, ladies and gentlemen. But here's the twist. The W12 engine didn't die. It couldn't. It was too good. So Volkswagen did what Volkswagen does. They put it in everything else. The Bentley Continental GT, W12. The Audi A8L, W12 option. The Volkswagen Phaeton, a luxury sedan that cost more than a Mercedes S-Class, W12. The Volkswagen Touareg? Yep, W12. The engine that was meant for a supercar ended up in sedans and SUVs. Let that irony sink in. And here's where it gets really interesting. That W configuration, two VR6s at a 72-degree angle, became the foundation for something even more insane. Take that W architecture, expand it, add 4 more cylinders, making 2 VR8s instead of VR6s, bolt them together, add 4 turbochargers, and you get the W16, the engine that powers the Bugatti Veyron, the Bugatti Chiron, the fastest production cars ever built. The W12 Nardò didn't just break records. It helped validate the architecture that would define hypercars for the next 20 years. So let me get this straight. Volkswagen built a car that broke 7 world records. Those records still stand 23 years later. The engine went on to power Bentleys, Audis, and Volkswagen's own luxury cars. The W configuration became the basis for the Bugatti Veyron and Chiron. And the car itself, the one that proved all of this was possible, sits in a museum somewhere, never to turn a wheel for a paying customer. That's not corporate strategy. That's automotive tragedy. Imagine an alternate timeline. 1999, the W12 goes into limited production. 500 units, $300,000 each. It outsells the Ferrari 360 Modena in its first year. Volkswagen becomes a legitimate supercar manufacturer overnight. Porsche calls their lawyers, then their engineers. Lamborghini has to actually try harder. And the whole landscape of European performance cars shifts. But that's not what happened. Because accountants exist. I need you to appreciate the full absurdity here. Volkswagen spent years and millions developing this car. They proved it worked beyond anyone's expectations. They broke records that still stand today. And then they said, you know what? Let's not sell this. Let's put the engine in a sedan nobody asked for instead. Peak German efficiency right there. Speaking of that sedan nobody asked for, the Volkswagen Phaeton. Remember the engine from our supercar? VW put it in a luxury sedan that launched in 2002, the same year as the record attempt. The Phaeton cost over $100,000. It competed with the Mercedes S-Class and BMW 7 Series, and Americans bought approximately nobody of them. The engine that deserved a supercar ended up in a commercial failure. Sometimes the jokes write themselves. And then, In April 2024, Bentley announced that the W12 engine would be discontinued. After 21 years of production, the last W12 rolled off the line at the Crewe factory. The engine that Piëch created to prove Volkswagen could build a supercar finally died, not in a blaze of glory, but in a luxury sedan most people can't afford. The W12 Nardò's legacy ended not with a bang, but with a press release nobody read. But here's the thing, those 24-hour records, still standing. In 2025, no production-based prototype has officially surpassed its FIA-certified 24-hour average. Tesla hasn't touched them. Rimac hasn't touched them. No electric hypercar has come close. The gasoline-powered, naturally aspirated W12 Nardò from 2002 still holds records that modern technology can't beat. It's like finding out that a typewriter from 1999 still types faster than any computer keyboard. It makes no sense. And yet, here we are. Ferdinand Piëch passed away in 2019. He never saw a production W12 Nardò. But his fingerprints are everywhere in modern Volkswagen Group. The Bentley Continental GT, his engine. The Bugatti Veyron, his architecture. The Porsche Cayenne, he pushed for that too. The Lamborghini Urus, his vision of brand expansion. The man who stood trackside at 3 a.m. watching a Volkswagen break records shaped the entire automotive industry. And his greatest creation never reached a single customer. Here's a fun hypothetical. If a W12 Nardò existed for sale, what would it be worth? Automotive auction experts estimate somewhere between $3 and $5 million. For a car that was never sold. For a car that exists only as a concept. The value isn't in the metal. It's in the story. It's in the records. It's in the what if. Collectors would pay millions for the car that proved Volkswagen could beat everyone, and then wasn't allowed to. And here's the ultimate irony. In 2023, Volkswagen announced they're focusing on electric cars. They killed the Beetle again. They're struggling against Tesla. They're trying to prove they can compete in a new market. Sound familiar? 25 years ago, they had a car that proved they could compete with anyone. They chose not to sell it. Maybe, just maybe. If they'd actually sold the W12, they wouldn't be playing catch-up today. But what do I know? I'm just a guy who watches cars go in circles. February 23, 2002. 3 in the morning. Ferdinand Piëch stands at the Nardò ring watching an unpainted carbon fiber Volkswagen supercar break records that still stand today. He built the impossible. He proved the impossible. And then, corporate decided the impossible was bad for business. The W12 Nardò ran for 24 hours at 200 miles per hour. But it never ran for a single customer. 322.891 kilometers per hour. 7 world records. 0 production. That's not failure. That's tragedy. And somewhere in Wolfsburg, there's an accountant who will never understand what they cost the world. This is Supercar Chronicles, where we celebrate the engineering insanity that defines the world's most extreme machines. If you want more stories of corporate madness and supercars that broke the rules, smash that subscribe button. And if you're curious how American manufacturers responded to European dominance, check out Car Chronicles, where we cover the muscle cars and performance legends that proved Detroit could fight back. The Hellcat versus Ferrari battles. The Corvette versus Porsche wars. The underdog stories that make you proud to be a gearhead. Links in the description. I'm out. Go appreciate your car that actually exists.